Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this event in which I want to a little bit spend time with you to talk a little bit about macrobiotics. Many of you have been contacting us and asking a little bit to have a little bit more information about what macrobiotics is about, and especially in our courses also, what kind of material do we study, what kind of material do we cover. So I want to welcome all of you and thank you very much. And a little bit, I'm gonna go into my talk already. And I want to make it a little bit friendly, obviously, because it's kind of like a sharing kind of approach. And I want to start by thinking together, what if I was to choose one word, what macrobiotics is about, I would choose life. Life. Life is the key word that in the so-called macrobiotics word, which is a bit complicated, everybody probably agrees with that. Bios. This bios is life. Okay. So everything really in macrobiotics revolves around life. Our lives, how to improve our lives, how to develop a good way of life, how to know more about life. So our studies, we study a lot about things related to life in a practical way. Practical way because we want to implement things, aspects in our lives we want to improve in order to develop ourselves and have a better life. And for ourselves, for our families, for people. So next keyword is people. Macrobiotic revolve around people, human beings you may call, your family, us, you, me, life and people. Macrobiotics around the world has been spreading as we know macrobiotics today, has been spreading or began, you may say. So let me tell you a little bit about the history. About 100 years history, modern macrobiotics, you may say, about 100 years history. And very much related to what we call macrobiotics today, began here in Japan. I'm here in Japan, in Nara right now. And there was a doctor in those days called Ishizuka Sagen that began to notice that the dietary changes coming into Japan in those days were causing a little bit, beginning to cause health problems, health issues. So he began to find out what these changes are and why is it causing weakness and health issues in the Japanese people in those days. For example, two items he noticed, because the development of macrobiotics has been going on for a long time, and therefore there's been a lot of development, and step by step began with very simple ideas, but then eventually they were very well developed over time. But it was just through a period of a long time, about 100 years. So he noticed, for example, that people began to increase consumption of animal food, and particularly certain types of animal food that the Japanese people were not so familiar with and even didn't even consume, or consume in very moderate amounts. For example, meats and milk and dairy products. Milk, dairy products was not part of the Japanese diet in those days. So he began to notice that the changes also were starting to make a difference in the health of the people. People also began consuming more sweets, more sugars, and then he noticed one more thing began to change, which one is, you may say, the food proportions, but the other one is the quality. The quality of the food also very slowly began to change. In particularly, he pinpointed that foods began to be more mass-produced and particularly refined. So instead of eating more whole grains, began to eat more white rice and white flour. Instead of consuming the sugars in a little bit more whole and refined form, started to become white rice and refined salt and so on. So this, he noticed, he was a doctor, by the way, and so he was particularly at the beginning looking at it a little bit more from a modern nutritional point of view that had just arrived in Japan as a new perspective, very different from the traditional one. And he began to conduct his own research, and little by little he began to kind of a little bit identify what are those changes and why is it causing health issues in the Japanese population little by little in those days. Other thing he did very interestingly is when people encounter those health issues, instead of trying to symptomatically kind of make up for those imbalances in a more, you may say, supplement way or through medication, he began to think differently. And he began to look more what's the cause and then approach the problem from the root cause. That means dietary changes. In this case, go back to it a little bit more traditional way and unrefined way. So in those days, he began to promote eating brown rice because it's the main grain here in Japan and it's a major staple food, which was very kind of pioneer work, you may say, because now today we hear a lot about whole grains and, you know, let's consume whole foods. But in those days was just the beginning of moving into the opposite direction, more refinement, more highly processing. And very early he pinpointed that eating brown rice and whole grains was very good. His work is not well known around the world, but in Japan, yes. I've been here living for over 30 years or close to 30 years now. And many people who talk about food education, who talk about improvements in food and diet for health, many people were influenced over the years by these men. Then the next person I'd like to make a brief comment about, because played an important role in developing macrobiotics and is many times referred as the founder of modern macrobiotics, is George Osawa. That's his pen name. His Japanese name is Sakurasawa, Nyoichi Sakurasawa. But anyways, when he was young, he contracted tuberculosis, the lung type of tuberculosis, which in those days was, there was no medication and there was no so-called cure. And his mother had passed away of tuberculosis, his sister had passed away of tuberculosis. And so he had very little chance of survival, considering the times. But he, you know, young person, full of life, you may say, and eager to do something to try to improve his health and hopefully be able to recover. And in a second-hand bookstore, he found a book by this man, Ishizuka Sagen, because after he conducted a lot of research over the years and then applied his idea of eating in a more traditional, balanced way and also more whole foods, many people began to recover their health. And he collected all of that information and he started food education. Back then, he started food education and writing books. So George Osawa came in contact with this kind of idea, and he thought, well, you know, I'll just give it a try because I have nothing to lose, and diet, it's a very new concept in those days that could help the health, but, you know, he felt attracted to give it a try. Eventually, he was able to recover his health. And that was obviously a life kind of experience that impact the person forever. And George Osawa dedicated the rest of his life partly to study the relationship between food, diet, and health. And he went to study at the place where they were conducting the education about food education, and spent a few years there studying. And then after that, he continuously pursued his whole life the relationship between food and health. He went beyond Japan. He was a very international-oriented person. He lived and visited many times Europe. In those days, it was not easy to travel. And he loved to read, and he loved to write also. And in his visits to Europe, he tried to learn also a lot of what was going on there in terms of diet. It's a person that very interestingly tried to make kind of like a bridge between East and West, between Oriental society thinking and Western thinking. And when he would go to Europe, he would teach a lot of what he was learning, but on his way back to Japan, sometimes he would pick up some books that were really interesting, that he would think that maybe it would be positive for Japanese people to get to know more about Western thinking and culture, and he would translate them into Japanese and publish them in Japan. So the reason I mention this because the macrobiotics also contain a lot of these East-West, Western, modern, and traditional Oriental coming together, exchange, learning from each other, and incorporating views into our life, into our way of life. Here, about life, I'd like to add one more aspect, because just to study is not enough. Learn is very important. Raise consciousness, awareness, learn from each other, open-minded, very good, very important. It's part of our own development, it's how we make better choices, and it's how we improve our lives. But macrobiotics, in addition to that, very important factor is the practice. Practice of a better quality, better way of life. Practice. So what we learn about life, we implement into our daily life. That's how we truly benefit from what we learn and from learning from others. That's how we really benefit. So this is what connects, this daily practice is what connects study of life to us. That's what makes us improve, make us better, whether health or any other thing we want to improve. Right? This needs to connect with each other. So, so with this in mind, searching around the world if there were any people, any culture who this connection between food and health was there. He searched around the world. He studied a little bit about, obviously not only Japan is part of Oriental culture, that means the many aspects are shared among all Asian countries. And Oriental medicine, also traditional Chinese medicine, etc. There are many variations, but they are all shared similarity. And then connected to that is Tibetan medicine, and if you connect it also goes to India, and they have Ayurveda, which also shares many similarities. But as he kind of a little bit broadened his view of life and searched for more information around the world, he also came across the works of Hippocrates, who was a Greek philosopher about 2,500 years ago. And he was also promoting dietary changes to regain health. He's very famously known for kind of like a quotation or view, let food be thy medicine. So anyways, he realized that actually food has been used throughout history by many cultures around the world to promote health or to regain health. So he began to gather that information, and particularly all the time helping people to regain their health in many ways. And he tried to find more tools, more practical tools on how to help to go about doing that. But his main area of development, research, and integrated into Macrobiotics was, of course, on one side was modern nutrition, because that's spreading around the world and obviously making an impact on the way we eat around the world. So he obviously paid attention to that. But then he focused more on Oriental traditions and including Chinese medicine. How traditionally in Asia food has been used for healing and for helping people recover their health. So these two kind of views, the more modern Western developments and Oriental, more traditional way, along with a more traditional diet, became the basis of what today we call the Macrobiotic diet and the Macrobiotic approach to eating. Over the years, more development, a lot of trial and error over the years, meaning coming up with ideas and then maybe difficult to practice or difficult to incorporate, and so needed to be updated, needed to be changed. And also he was very eager to spread it around the world and encourage many of his students and encourage many people who related to him to go out in the world and to spread and to teach about the importance of food for health. One of the main person who was influenced by George Osawa, who was my teacher, and I focus a little bit on him, is Michio Kushi, although there were many others, okay? And many collaborated together and help each other to develop this around the world. But Michio Kushi is more close to me, and obviously a lot of our studies here in my school and the schools that we are collaborating as part of so-called global macrobiotics. Michio Kushi's development of macrobiotics after George Osawa, because George Osawa passed away in the 1960s, is a little bit more our main reference and the main approach that we use day to day. So Michio Kushi moved from Japan to America, spent most of his life in America, and especially traveling around the West and around the world, but especially his influence in the West was very strong. And he was eventually began to pursue the same path on how to develop health people, how to help develop, bridge together East-West views and ways of thinking, how to apply to our way of life, and how to help develop ourselves in a more peaceful direction, a more healthy direction, in a develop more happy direction, you may say. Right? Kind of big vision he had, and but he did a great job in developing these ideas, making it more practical and making it a little bit more adaptable to the whole world, not just to one culture or one way of eating, more limited, but make it a little bit more easy to implement around the world. He helped so many people over the years improve their health, wrote many books about it, so there's a lot of macrobiotic literature. I know you're all a little bit interested in macrobiotics, and people don't read much today, but back then, when I began Macrobiotics, I tell you a little bit about myself soon. Books was a major way that people got to know about Macrobiotics, or got to start a little bit making changes in their diet and lifestyle, or to learn a little bit about Oriental views, how to incorporate that into practical ways into our way of life, about yin and yang, energy, and many other things. It was through books, right? Through teachers also, through classes, but also books. But anyways, just I want you to know that there are a lot of literature, macrobiotic literature, that is also very interesting, very good, and maybe at some point when you have time, you want to do a little bit of your own research and do a little bit of studies by yourself if you want. Anytime you can do that. Through the internet you can get those books. It is true that many of those books were written a while ago, and therefore things have changed a little bit. The diet has been adapted and also has been developing around the world, macrobiotics, and adapting to the local food cultures, which is something that is not reflected in those books, maybe you may say. But anyways, they are there with wonderful information material that we can all make use of it whenever we want. So anyways, Michio Kushi, and along with his students, his friends, collaborate people, and other teachers came from Japan, etc., had a big impact in the West and around the world in the way we think about food and the connection between food and health. In those days, it was not very clear that food had something to do with the rise in chronic disease in modern society and many conditions that are more modern, develop more and spread around the world. I'm talking, for example, about cardiovascular disease, I'm talking about cancers, I'm talking about diabetes, I'm talking about obesity, I'm talking about high blood pressures, allergies, and many, health issues that we're facing today that are very much related now, we know, to our diet, but in those days was very new. So macrobiotics helped to kind of link these two together. And a lot of research was conducted little by little, and kind of eventually it got to the point that we were able to realize that to a large degree our health is related to the way we eat and our lifestyle, which is something that from the very beginning Macrobiotic has been pointing out, and this is a large part of what people come to study with us, is because they want to know much more about this and how they can implement dietary changes in a more healthy, balanced direction, and how they can lead a little bit of a better life by making changes by themselves. Right? So my story goes as shared by many thousands of people around the world, and it started with my mother. And she was one of those individuals that struggled with her health since early age, and all kinds of digestive troubles and poor blood quality, having to constantly go to doctor, take a lot of medication, condition decline, because that's part of chronic disease that we all need to be aware. It's not something happens in one day. It's something that develops over time. And if we just take the modern approach, which is usually more symptomatic only, then usually, and don't take care of the cause of the problem, then usually it gets worse over time. Right? And that's exactly what happened to her. And it got to the point, after surgeries and many other trying to get better ways, there was kind of not much hope for her recovery. And that basically was a turning point in her life. She began to seek different paths. And this is also very core to macrobiotics. Just some keywords, some key points. Self-care. She began to think, what can I do myself to improve my health? This is very core macrobiotic approach to life. We take more responsibility of our own health. We care for our health and our family's health. And we are willing to make effort to make improvements. Self-care approach. Self-care approach. So anyways, it was a turning point in her life. As many people that I've met throughout my life came to a little bit this kind of situation that they were really searching for a change in their lives. And she became open-minded, and many friends, her friends, encouraged her to try different things. Alternative things. In the West, we usually call alternative medicine, alternative ways, because there was the more conventional Western approach only, and then eventually, over time, more ideas for helping improve our health started to become popularized. And so she had chance to study a little bit about yoga, practice yoga, herbal medicine, a little bit start move more toward what you can do yourself. Another key word is more natural approach to self-care, natural way, in a more natural way. Okay? In a more natural way. Obviously, when you start practicing these things, you come in contact with different perspectives about life, with different views of life, different ways of life. And for example, any of you who may have practiced yoga, they talk also about energy, prana. They talk, many of them practice vegetarian or semi-vegetarian diets. They cut down on animal food, particularly meats, and so on and so forth. So she came in contact with many of these ideas. She became vegetarian, and was, trying to implement many of these new things to see if she could improve her health. Things got better, but not good enough. And there were so many things she didn't know about food in those days, still very, very unclear. And maybe some improvement on some areas, but then many mistakes in other areas. And so finally, anyway, she reached so-called Macrobiotics. She had no idea what it was about. And Michio Kushi, Evelyn Kushi, her wife, his wife, conducted a seminar in Barcelona in the 1970s. Okay, so now it's the story was going on around the 1970s in Europe, in this case, particularly in Spain. And she decided to see what it was about. It had to do with health, had to do with cooking, had to do with diet, had to do with body work, had to do with taking better care of yourself. So obviously she was interested to know. 3-day seminar, and she was able to learn many new things that she had never heard about before. First time she heard about eating whole grains. First time she heard that maybe sugar also could be part of her health problem. She loved dairy products because, especially after cutting down on meat, she replaced them pretty much by dairy products, which now we know a little bit high in fat and other issues that may not be suitable, especially for a person who wants to improve her health. Right? And anyway, she decided to give it a try. They were Japanese people, and they also were using a little bit of a strange food that she had never seen or heard before, including sea vegetables or fermented products like miso and soy sauce. So there was a lot of new things around it, but much of it made sense to her, and she decided to give it a try. So this, as a background today, I mentioned so that you can see a very common story of many of us who have been over the years coming into macrobiotics. What has been the purpose of why we look for macrobiotics in the first place, and what are some of the things that little by little, that we learn and study and implement into our lives. Now I'd like to go a little bit more practical into what we study in our courses, how I approach it, and related to a little bit the story that I just mentioned. There are many ways. Macrobiotics is very wide, and over the years have covered a lot of things, you may say. And we all interpret macrobiotics slightly different, which is normal, because we all have a life and we all, have our own practices and approaches to life. What I did, I grew up, just to continue the story, to finish it up. So after my mother began Macrobiotics and got good results, she began to change our way of eating at home. I was 5, 6 years old, more or less, when she began to implement, you may say, healthy dietary habits, cooking a little bit differently, incorporating some new foods, certain foods a little bit kind of disappear from the kitchen, from my home. So as a kid, I went through many dietary changes, and because of her eagerness from my mother to make the whole family a little bit more healthy, and particularly she wanted us, like every parent obviously, wanted us to grow healthy, but also based on what she was learning and taking into consideration the mistakes she had made before and what she had learned, and many of the healthy foods that she was now eating that contributed to her improvement. And so I went through that whole process. It didn't stop at the family, because she eventually, with effort, for those of you who think of families, have families, or consider that, we usually think this way in Macrobiotics. First, you start yourself. Self-care. Always you try yourself first. Because then you go through the process not only of seeing the benefits in yourself, but you go through the process of making the changes, and you realize that there are certain difficulties that takes effort. So then when you apply to others, when you think of your family or friends, etc., then you've gone through that process yourself, and then therefore you can be much more careful in the way you approach. You can be more helpful in guiding them, right? So we always start by ourselves first. We recommend that way. And then eventually I went through that process, and then she began to wanted it to share with the rest, with society, with friends, with families, and then she became a teacher, Macrobiotic teacher. She became a little bit kind of like pioneer, spreading Macrobiotics in Spain, around Europe, and constantly learning, constantly helping others. So for me, I grew up in that environment. And after I finished my high school studies, Macrobiotics made a lot of sense to me. It had been an important part of my life, and something that I wanted to share with others. And also because this way of life relates to many other aspects of our lives in a more wide sense. It relates to environment. It's a very gentle for the environment. Society-related improvements in society. And so I had that kind of a little bit vision myself, that I wanted to contribute to improve many things in the world, and therefore Macrobiotics was a wonderful tool for me. It had been all around me all my life. Right? So I went to the Kushi Institute. We actually moved to Boston in America, in the United States, where Michio Kushi, Kushi, and a little bit the Macrobiotic community was very active in those days, and Macrobiotics was influencing in America very strongly in those days. And we moved to Boston, to Brookline, in more detail. And after my high school studies, I engaged in Macrobiotic studies at the Kushi Institute there, and stayed for over 4 years, both studying, working. I love cooking, by the way, and so, I've been involved in Macrobiotics for most of my life. One area that has been close to me, because not necessarily every teacher is like that. There are many different teachers with different areas that they like to develop more. Cooking has always been part of my interest since I'm a kid. I started cooking. I've cooked professionally also for many years, and then I focused very much on education eventually, because we opened the Kushi Institute of Japan back about 20 years ago. and I became the education director, and I was the main teacher, and I was in charge of making the new curriculum, new educational approach that was a little bit more updated, that was a little bit more developed, and also more adapted to people here in Japan. Okay? So I was in charge of that. So I went fully into education at that moment, and I've been teaching obviously for many years. And this course that we offer here, Global Macrobiotic course, is based on that whole experience, my lifelong experience, and also this new development that I did in developing macrobiotic education here in Japan, and a little bit approach to Asian people. And I tried to, in this course, I tried to incorporate two things. One is the essence of macrobiotics, what I find makes macrobiotics unique and practical. And the second is the practical side of macrobiotics. So I focus a lot on the practical side. How to implement dietary lifestyle changes and views of life that really can make a difference in our life, in guiding us how to make more balance, how to attain better health, and so the course is very much like that. It has theory because there are more things, details that we need to learn. Macrobiotics is also more keywords. Not about just believing and taking in things without thinking about them. No. It's important that we raise our own awareness, consciousness, that we choose by ourselves what makes sense to us. And therefore, for things to be more, for us to be able to make those decisions, it's important that we understand more about why we make such recommendations and how do we implement those things. How does it work? Why and how? Okay. And it takes time sometimes to explain this why. Okay. And how to do it, how to practice also takes time. For example, we can discuss a lot about what is the balanced diet, what is nutritionally good, this and that. But that will not improve your health at all. At that time, you're just thinking about it, you're learning about it, you're discussing about it. Dietary changes make a difference in our life when we eat it. So it has to come into our mouth. Right? Eat. We have to eat the food. Right? And how to do that involves many things, including cooking, because many healthy foods are not available in public places. Many packaged foods don't contain them. So if you want to eat them, get the health benefit of these so-called healthy foods, if you don't cook them, they're not easily available. So cooking become a very important part of our courses, right? Because especially today it's a need for people who want to make improvements in their way of eating. It's very common sense, but people sometimes forget about it. And people keep looking for information, but if they don't make effort to actually cook it, then get little benefits. So obviously cooking has always been part of macrobiotics, and we don't separate diet from cooking. Now, some of you may like cooking more than others, fine. Some have more time than others to cook, fine. But be generally a little bit knowledgeable of how to cook today is very important if you want to implement better dietary habits or improve your diet. So cooking has been there all along in macrobiotics for various reasons, but number one, because of this. Because if there's certain foods you want to eat, then sometimes you have to cook them yourself. It's very practical. Now, how do we approach diet? Let's go more practical. Okay, and this is more like what we study in our courses, and why we recommend such things and how it works, etc. There's two things going back to this 100 years time that we've been very focused on developing very well. One is we call food proportions. Human beings, we can eat just about anything. We can eat grains, we can eat vegetables, we can eat beans, we can eat sea vegetables, we can eat insects, we can eat meat, we can eat milk, we can eat eggs, we can eat pretty much everything. But how we combine it, how proportions goes, play a very big role in balance and health. So we've been paying attention to this factor all along. And this is very important, that aspect of macrobiotics, how to do that well. If you take a look at what today is considered nutritionally the best way of eating to prevent chronic disease or even to improve chronic disease, like lifestyle medicine is area of nutrition, focus on that, which we have been doing macrobiotics all along anyways. These stories I told you is the beginning of that. They call it something like a plant-based diet, right? Which you may have heard. Sometimes also they say like a more vegetarian diet or a so-called flexitarian diet, which are variations of how we consume animal food, right? Or vegan diet with no animal food, etc. Right? Okay. So basically they are talking about proportions of plant and animal food. Right? But this is very vague. And so many mistakes occur. Mistakes means also unbalance ways it goes. Right? I was very recently, I saw a talk by the Dalai Lama. Very interesting talk. Somebody asked him, confused a little bit about the concept of whether Buddhists eat meat or not. There are some people who practice Buddhism, and an aspect of practicing Buddhism, especially monks, has been traditionally in many parts of Asia to don't consume any animal food at all. But someone heard also. So this person had a little bit conflicting ideas because he sees a lot of Buddhist people eating a lot of animal food, and he had heard that the Dalai Lama himself was eating meat, sometimes, in small amount maybe. So he asked directly to the Dalai Lama about this issue, and he said, well, there are different ways people practice, obviously. There are records, texts that sometimes recommend no animal food. There are some that say in small amount, in moderation. There's some that say if you don't kill the animal, if it's given to you, because, you know, many monks, they just accept whatever food is given to them. They're supposed not to have ego in that sense. So you accept any food people give to you. And if it has some meat, then you say thank you and you eat it. If it has an egg, you say thank you and you eat it. Like that. But anyways, he told also a little bit about his own story. Because we all have our own story. That it's important to, whatever we learn, to combine everything with our own choices and our own story. Macrobiotics also, that forms part of macrobiotics. We don't all need to eat exactly the same. But we can learn principles of balance to maintain good nutrition, good health, right? So anyways, he said, in my area of the world where I grew up, Tibet, it is very difficult to practice only eat vegetable quality food, plant quality food. It's very cold, high mountains, and people need to rely more on animal food. Long winters. Actually, there's some areas that if you don't eat animal food, basically you die because there's no other food available, right? So he said, so in our practice of Buddhism, animal food, most people have consumed here and there, depending especially where they live, obviously, but yes. And I grew up a little bit like that. At one point, when he moved to India, he decided to go vegetarian. And he stopped eating animal food, particularly meat. I don't know the details but anyways, this is what he said, okay? But anyways, after a couple of years of practicing that, which is supposed to be very healthy, right? Okay, plant food, vegetarian, right? Many people recommending that for health today, right? But he got health issues after a while, a couple of years. In particularly, he got gallbladder problem, serious gallbladder problem. Then he mentioned something that most people probably didn't pick up, but I did. He said, at that time when I made those changes, I started consuming lots of nuts. Every day, lots of nuts. I thought, okay, that's the problem. Nuts are very oily, very high in fat, difficult to digest. If you start proportion, nuts become very high, you can get certain health problems, particularly in organs that are related in digesting fats or that start to accumulate fat, etc. In this case, the gallbladder. Then he got recommendation from a Tibetan medicine doctor and Ayurveda medicine doctor, and they said, why don't you go back to your old diet? You're more used to it, and it seemed to be better for you. So he went back to eat a little bit of animal food. My point is this. We know little about food proportions. People are very confused today about this issue. But it's very core to maintain good nutritional, energetic balance and health, to learn more about this issue. And this is one element of our studies that we pay attention. Okay? Food proportions. What food proportions are generally more suitable to optimize health. And it's in Macrobiotics, we've been developing this for over many years, and we update it as we go along, as we learn more about it. And it, yes, contains a wide range of foods, but we try to combine them in generally good proportions. No need to measure, no need to know exactly the amount of nutrients involved in every food, but yet very practical way to help us maintain balance, whether we make meals at home or when we go out to eat, to have a sense of what foods to eat more, what foods we need to be a little bit pay attention, be more careful, what foods are more optional. So based on this, also I'd like to say that macrobiotic way of eating for general maintaining of health actually can be a bit wide, but maintaining certain basic proportions, such as the importance of grains, vegetables are very important, etc., etc. This is, we place some time learning about this. Then, when it comes to animal food, we have a flexible perspective. However, like I just pointed out, my story of the Dalai Lama, even if you want to go vegan or vegetarian, you need to pay attention about good food proportions. It's not like automatically you will be healthy if you only eat plants. No, it's not going to work. We know that. Okay? And because people make many mistakes in that area, usually they go back to eat animal food because they say vegan doesn't work. And it's not like that. It's just they don't know how to make it work. And this is exactly what we learn. So you can practice in a vegan style macrobiotics, you can practice in a vegetarian style macrobiotics, and even with a small amount of meat if you want. Okay. We also pay attention three ways also I'd like you to consider diet. So again, I want you to start to think more flexible way. Okay. One is daily eating, which doesn't need to be too complicated, and sometimes we don't have that much time for cooking and has to be simple meals sometimes, or at least a few throughout the day. It's okay. It's okay. Sometimes we like to eat a little bit more fancy, enjoy ourselves, and it's not necessary to pay so much attention to details, and enjoying yourself is also part of macrobiotics. Okay? Traditional way of eating and traditional diets, traditional foods are wonderful. Food culture is wonderful, but also modern foods also may be part of what we eat, and the way we cook also, prepared in a little bit more modern way, also okay. All of that forms part of macrobiotics. Another area we develop, which I want to talk more a little bit about it after the break, is how to use food more for healing, so-called healing macrobiotic diet, or the medicinal use of food and cooking, etc., which we have also developed very well. I'd like to point out that all of this is macrobiotics, okay, all of it. And that's why it's a little bit wide. It's not narrow. It's a little bit wide. We also pay attention and think that it's very important to adapt the diet better to the local climate, place where we are living, the food culture locally. Those factors, we think, play a very important role, which is very commonly today. In the majority of the information I read about health and diet, they many times never point out any of this, and sometimes come up with ideas that that everybody has to follow exactly the same. And we don't think that's the best way, because also that's not like a long-term approach. Macrobiotics looks for long-term approach to life. Not just now because I'm struggling with constipation, I make these changes, or because I want to lose weight, I make these changes, or because I have diabetes and I want to improve. That's very important, and at the beginning you may need to focus on those issues. That for you is important, yes. But then you also need to think, how do I eat throughout my life? How do I maintain my health and well-being, quality of life throughout my life? Macrobiotics, we approach it both ways. If you have something that is your concern at the moment, then what to do about it, but also like how do we generally eat long term. And for that one is food proportions, which we learn well. The next one is huge one, is food quality. This again, I already pointed out at the beginning of my story, at that time was mainly refinement of food, but within 100 years we've seen a complete change in our food in terms of quality, much of it not contributing to better health. And therefore what should be something very simple, like learning to choose a little bit better and making meals that are nice based on those foods, suddenly there's a whole new issue that we need to take into consideration, which is food quality. And this also takes time to go over, to explain what foods are best in terms of quality, what foods we need to be careful, maybe a bit less would be better, what foods better avoid if you want to optimize health and particularly want to recover health, etc., etc. We need to go over in quite a lot of detail because there are, in a common regular modern supermarket in a big city, most food is what we call ultra-processed foods. Foods that have been grown with chemicals, broken down into powders and additives and this and that, put together back in a very artificial way. And now we're learning, we noticed long time ago, but now we're learning that they are causing lots of health issues, okay, for us. And they cause lots of troubles for the planet and so on and so forth. So pretty much, basically, macrobiotics starts from a very simple concept, which is back to this one, natural food. How nature produces it as much as possible. Today we also call them whole foods, we call them unrefined foods, whatever you want to call it. But it's a simple concept. The more, the better we move toward natural foods. But that also we need to pay attention, because today, even we think it's natural food, not really natural. They've done already many things behind. They've used hormones, they've used lots of antibiotics, they've used feed that makes the animals or the plants change, and so on and so forth. So Macrobiotics, for example, throughout these years, what has been promoting? We've been promoting unrefined whole foods all along. We've been promoting foods that contain the less chemicals, the better. They include organic foods. We've been promoting more local food, more seasonal food, more natural way of consuming our food, including all those factors together. But again, in detail, it's good to study a little bit about it. Because, for example, things like fermented foods, for example, are gaining a lot of popularity today. The probiotics and the prebiotics, which is basically the fiber and the fermentation that produce good quality bacteria that is good for the gut. Actually, they also contain enzymes that are very good for digestion, right? But the quality of fermented foods today, very poor quality. Even in Japan, very famous place for fermented foods, right? And longevity too, right? But the quality of miso today is very poor, and the quality of soy sauce is very poor, and the pickles are full of chemicals and sugars, and you have to pay attention to these things if you want to optimize health. Right? So anyways, we do spend time talking about food quality, and these two, as simple as they seem, already is the core to maintain good balance, eat in a more natural way, and improvement of health. Even these two important aspects. And that's why we pay attention to it, because there are two core important aspects for people today, to be able to maintain better health and to implement dietary changes in a more healthy direction. Then the third point that we put along with this, obviously, is the cooking. Because we want you to try them, to eat them. We want you to make the effort to buy them, to cook them, to try them, right? Like that. So this already is the core of level 1, what we call level 1, which level 1 is, simply speaking, an introduction to macrobiotics, to what we've been doing, and to what we do, and to what we recommend, and what we share. We also share our experience, by the way. So it's not just theoretical course. We share how we've been learning about these things, how we use it day to day, how people are doing in different parts of the world, right? And how they apply. So this introduction to macrobiotics starts with this part. Then a little bit we talk about nutritional balance, because nutrition perspective, which is more of a Western perspective, is more the physical aspect of food and the chemical, you may say, things that can be weighted or measured, part of our food, which is also obviously important to take into consideration. But we do it, you may say, in a more simple way, in a more holistic way, trying to maintain that whole view, linking things. And the core of our approach is to create general good balance, and that our daily meals contain all the nutritional needs that require in a simple way. That's the core. So we don't go in over detail. We don't get overly confused. We don't have to measure anything, but we have a very clear understanding of why we eat in this way and how that way of eating over time is going to improve nutrition and solve nutritional imbalances. We do a little study of what the main nutrients are, what are good sources of those nutrients. We go over carbohydrates. There's a tremendous confusion about carbohydrates. People think they are bad, but actually it's the main nutrient in the human diet. And this is clearly known. And that's why we're recommending all nutritionists more to move into plant-based diet. Plant-based diet means we're consuming more plants which contain carbohydrates. So how can carbohydrates be bad if all the nutritional evidence over the years is pointing out that to reduce chronic disease we need to eat whole food plant-based diet? Right? It doesn't make sense. It's just confusion. And it's about the quality of carbohydrates is different, and we need to identify that. Simple sugars, highly processed carbohydrates is very different to whole grains or vegetables which contain complex carbohydrates. So anyways, of course we study a little bit about nutrition in basic ways. Protein, it's been a huge issue for so long. Actually, modern nutrition began about 200 years ago. Main focus of attention was on protein. And now we realize that the majority of people around the world are actually consuming too much protein, and actually of a quality which is animal protein that cause more health problems. So yes, we need to a little bit go over how nutritional views have been changing, why they're shifting toward plant-based, and how to practice moderation, and how to realize, because we forgot, many of us, that protein is pretty much available in every food. That means every time you eat, you are having protein. And not only animal food contain protein. So these seem simple things, but most people are confused about this, actually. And that's why we take time to discuss these issues together and learn. Fat, another so-called macronutrient, 3, right? Carbohydrates, protein, fat. Fat in the modern diet is a big problem. It's too much fat is one, and then the quality usually very poor, and contributes to fat accumulations in our body. Many of the chronic disease today is more of a problem of excess accumulation in the body. But because our diet is so processed, then we also at the same time experience many deficiencies. So we see people who are overweight. I studied, lived many years in the United States. People are obese. There is definitely certain nutritional excess in their bodies accumulating. And at the same time, their blood quality is very poor. They have anemia. They are lacking fiber. They are lacking many things also. This is what we call nutritional poor diet or unbalanced diet that we need to correct. And supplements maybe can help a little bit when people are having such an extreme diet, but it's not been nowhere in the world been a long-term solution. Nowhere. nowhere in the world people taking supplements have good health and no rates of chronic disease. It's not worked. So Macrobiotics would like people to take one step forward and try to get all the nutrients necessary from our way of eating diet, so-called diet. And that's why the way we approach it a little bit. Nutrition. I think it's a very important part of the course. I think when people before coming to this course are very confused, I get plenty of questions usually that they thought or heard it was this way or that way, and then little by little everything becomes more clear, more simple, and they get a lot of practical advice on how to do, how to go about creating better nutritional balance. There are also many foods that people don't know about in certain parts of the world, depending on your food culture, that Macrobiotics has introduced, that contribute also very much to good nutrition. For example, let me tell you about a few. Because of its Asian origin, obviously Macrobiotic has always incorporated a little bit of the Asian food culture to create and promote more health around the world, to improve our diet nutritional balance. I give you one example, sea vegetables. Macrobiotic a little bit, we recommend sea vegetable in small amounts, and depending on your food culture, this is a new item. It was completely new to me and to many people in the West, for example. But actually tremendous value there. Today, little by little, modern nutrition is starting to more and more recommend to have a little bit of sea vegetables, and they find it a very important element of the diet in order to not need supplements, yet your diet contain a very well balance of particularly minerals, but also many other elements which are also available in the sea vegetables, which is vitamins and so on. They are considered one of the most, what they call, nutritionally dense foods. Dense foods mean that contain a lot of nutrition within that food, which is the opposite of ultra-processed foods, which are usually high in fat or maybe sugars, but very poor in a wide range of minerals, vitamins, fibers, and other elements of the diet that should be there. So, we've been spreading the idea of consuming a little bit of sea vegetables, teaching people how to cook with sea vegetables, to familiarize with it, right? It was part of the traditional diet pretty much all around the world, especially in areas close to the ocean, but somehow, as we move more toward modern diet, it got cut out, and got to the point that people didn't think that sea vegetables was a human food, which is when we started Macrobiotics in the 1970s in Spain, was like that. We didn't know it was for human consumption. So I tell you simple story, but when my friends would come to my house and somehow we are hungry, you go to the kitchen, and then my mother had made a little bit like sea vegetable dish, and they look at that and they're like, wow, what is that? I said, well, sea vegetables. You can eat that? Yeah, of course. Now, today, things have changed, we know. But then again, it plays an important role, for example, supplying calcium, supplying iron, right, in more efficient ways than in the modern diet through only eating meat and dairy products, which is not working very well and contribute to many bone loss, osteoporosis, this and that, right? So there are many ways we can get those nutrients that we didn't think about or we didn't know about. Another kind of food category that I emphasize a little bit, particularly because after coming many years to Asia, I've realized that it plays such an important role and has played such an important role in helping achieve nutritional balance through plant-based diet, because most traditional way of eating is mostly plant-based diet, right? with moderate amount of animal food, which is soy products. And so things like tofu, a little bit of soy milk, fermented soybean products like miso, soy sauce, Southeast Asia developed like wonderful tempeh, etc., has always been, part of incorporated into macrobiotic way of eating to help people. They contain, for example, high amounts of protein containing all the amino acids, easy to get protein from those products, easy to cook with them, mostly available around the world today compared to many years ago. They also contain a lot of iron, they also contain, and so on and so forth, right? So this is a little bit how we approach modern nutrition in very practical way. Taking out a lot of the confusion going on, simplifying it, but obviously an important for all of us to study a little bit about it. And we continue these studies throughout the course and the future additional courses like levels 2 and levels 3. Always nutrition play a little bit role in helping us understand balance and in helping maintain health, but also recover it if needed, and also with basic understanding of what kind of nutrients you can expect in different foods. Okay, it's part of our ongoing studies, you may say, all the time a little bit. Nutrition also we need to understand and consider. I just give you another example. Many people, when they move to make changes in their diet and so on, they think that fruits is very good. They start taking lots of fruits. Before I mentioned about the Dalai Lama, maybe eating too many nuts, but fruits also can cause certain imbalances. They're mostly water, high in vitamins, but not so many minerals. The type of carbohydrates is simple sugars, which can bring blood sugars levels up and cause a little bit of imbalance. So they are not suitable as a main food. And many people make such mistakes. And maybe 1 month you feel good, your body maybe cleans up a little bit, but long term may cause imbalances for many people, right? Okay? Or not enough, right? And a little bit of weakness. Okay? Because of the name diet, and because people are looking for health, many people think that macrobiotic, so-called diet or macrobiotics, is something like a short-term diet that you do to get a certain benefit in certain area of your health. And my point is this: macrobiotic can be a little bit focused to help relieve certain health issue, yes, and can be adapted to particular health problems, yes, we also do that. But we are thinking long term, okay? Long term. Day to day, long term, throughout your life, there are certain things that you would like to do, because you not only need health today, you need it 10 years from now, and healthy aging is so important today. Healthy aging, natural healthy aging, feel good, have vitality, be able to have full use of your body and your mind at any stage in your life. Right? Yeah. It even becomes more important if some of you are interested to, in the future, have a family, have children, get pregnant. Actually, I would say macrobiotics is most important during that time. So it's the way of eating for human beings. Core to macrobiotics, thinking behind, making choices, selecting things, judging, has been human food. What is an optimal way for human beings to eat, including the wisdom that comes from the past. That's why we call traditions, and they had sense of staple foods more clear than we have today. but also including modern learnings, including mistakes, our own mistakes, or society's mistakes, or nutritional mistakes that we have been doing over the past. Because modern so-called nutrition over the years, what they recommend have been changing very, very much over the years. Okay? So we try to put it all together. Okay, very good. So I want to keep track of time. And now we're going to take a little break. And then when we come back, we're going to go into, you may say, much more unique aspects of macrobiotics, like the energetic part. Some of you completely new may not have heard, but the idea of yin-yang balance. And how do we approach more health issues? I'd like to talk more about, because all of that is part of our level 1 course with the introduction of macrobiotics in a little bit comprehensive way. We introduce macrobiotics, but in a very comprehensive way. That's why the course itself usually takes altogether about 10 sessions, 10 days of study or 10 sessions that incorporates the theory part, which is usually given by me in the form of lectures. There is, as part of the theory part, there is a textbook for your own reading and to go a little bit more in detail in many of the things we cover. And then we have the cooking classes and learning how to cook and how to implement everything. Okay? So let's take a half an hour break and then we continue.